Chapter 11. It turned out that Lester Swan enjoyed having folks to talk to. Clearing off the first row of tatty-ratty seats, he pressed us all to sit up at the front of the bus while he drove. Bobby and Will Jr. sat on one side of the bus, just behind the driver's seat, suddenly none too sure about us Beaumont kids and the funny things that happened around us. Me and Fish sat together across the aisle, both anxious to get back on our way. Samson preferred to keep to himself in the back, slipping again underneath the cot with a bag of potato chips, the Slim Jims, and the pile of magazines at his fingertips. "This old gal may have some faulty pistons, and her carburetor may need replacing, but she's still got some miles left in her," said Lester, rambling on to us about the big, pink delivery bus as he drove. He talked about that bus like it was a delicate, niminy-piminy thing that depended on him for its constant care and looking after. "Of course, I do well to remember to keep her below 54 miles an hour," Lester grimaced, screwing up his face like he was remembering all the times he hadn't remembered. "Anything over that, and this old bus just quits. I remember one time when—" "Just how long till we get to Selena?" Fish wanted to know, interrupting Lester's ramble impatiently. "Our papa's in a bad way. We need to get down there soon." My heart skipped and my stomach twisted as I remembered Mama's words. "The doctors say we'll just have to wait and see." Will and Bobby shifted nervously as they too recalled the reason we'd all climbed aboard that bus in the first place. "Well," said Lester, flustered by the bugaboo of having to change mental road maps mid-sentence. "Let me think. I have to get on up to B before 5. Keeping one hand on the steering wheel, Lester pulled a watch with a broken strap from the pocket of his overalls. "Doggone it," he said, nearly driving off the road as he stared at the watch. "I'm late!" The bus heaved and rattled as Lester stepped harder on the gas. Remembering everything he'd just finished telling us about the big pink bus breaking down if it went too fast, Fish and I kept a close and nervous eye, over Lester's shoulder at the speedometer. "So then," Fish continued, "after B, will you be going back to Selena? When you get done there?" Lester looked back at Fish distractedly, as though he hadn't been listening. "After B? Naw, I still got to go on over to Waymore. Then I have to make a quick stop down in Manhattan to pay some money to a lady friend. It's her cousin Larry who's my boss, and she gets real mad if I don't bring the money by. After that, we'll be headed back to Selena." By this time, Bobby had slid to the edge of her seat. She was peering intently around the barrier between her and the back of Lester's seat and scowling at the delivery man. Just how long is all that going to take? Exactly when are you planning on getting back?" "Oh, no later than tomorrow afternoon, I suppose," said Lester absently, as he took an exit off the interstate and headed still further north, farther from Selena, onto a small rural highway. "Tomorrow!" we all shouted. "Tomorrow? That's too long!" I cried. "Well, there's nothing I can do about that," said Lester, trying hard to end the conversation. "I can't afford to lose my job. If I go back now, I'll be fired for sure. Then it will be no Bibles, no bus, and no future for poor old Lester." I swallowed hard, caught between that rock and that hard place I had heard mentioned so often, and understanding fully now what a bad spot that truly was. How could I ask a man I didn't even know to risk his livelihood on my account? But how could I possibly wait another day to get to Papa? Tomorrow. That's just great. Bobby turned and looked at me, her eyes bulging in disbelieving voodoo vibes. "Tomorrow," she repeated once more, nodding her head and leaning back against her seat. "That's wonderful." Fish and Will Jr. were looking my way too. I cringed and sank down in my seat, feeling wretched and troubled over our new situation. To my surprise, Will winked my way with a crooked smile, making me feel a bit better. Out of everybody on that bus, Will was the only one who looked like he might be having fun. The itty-bitty town of B, Nebraska, was just about the size of a yellow-striped bumbler. It could buzz right by you if you blinked too slow. As though the situation wasn't bad enough for us already, things went even more cattywampus and cockeyed when we got to the teeny-tiny town. There was only one church in B. It was built boxy and angled like an accordion, but the windows of the church were dark, and the doors were locked up tight. Lester Swan looked from his watch toward the sun, now barely visible on the horizon, all the while tugging the door handles and pacing the bright green astroturf leading up to the side door. He sat down on the cement step of the church and scratched his head. I wandered away to avoid listening to Carleen and Rhonda blister and bellyache over Lester's latest blunder. Those two gals pickled me. They were so sour. Thinking about my own mama, I felt sorry for Lester. Rhonda's voice was nothing like what a mama's ought to be. Of course, my mama was extra special. I reminded myself. My mama was perfect. It took me years to figure out my savvy when I was your age, I remembered Mama telling me one day. We had been in the kitchen, me and Mama and Gypsy, and Mama had been trying to teach me how to make a perfect pie crust. But my crust was far from perfect. Gypsy had been more interested in squishing her fingers deep inside her own small lump of soft dough, pulling out pinches and eating them when Mama's head was turned. My crust had kept on crumbling and breaking, or sticking and tearing. I'd smash it back together and try rolling it out again and again, while Mama's crust lifted up clean and easy, spreading out across the bottom of the pan as soft and smooth as silk. Perfect as perfect. How did you know, Mama? I had asked, flour tickling my nose and falling like snow from the edge of the table where I stood with my own large rolling pin. How'd you figure out you're savvy? When did you first know that you were perfect? Mama looked down at the mess on the table and laughed. The sound was like the church bells in Hebron on a clear morning. At first I thought Mama might be laughing at my wounded and weary blob of dough. Then I remembered that my Mama would never do such a thing. She pulled one of the kitchen chairs up close and sat down, setting aside my rolling pin and taking my floured and dusty hands in her own. She smiled up at me with a sweet smile. I'm not perfect, Mibs. Nobody's perfect. I just have a knack for getting things right. Maybe that looks a lot like perfect sometimes. Besides, she continued, her smile faltering a bit as she squeezed my hands, you'd be surprised at how many people dislike spending time with someone who constantly gets things right. It's not always an easy way to be. I nodded at Mama as she hugged me. I was hardly able to imagine anyone not wanting to spend time with her. In most ways, Mibs, we Beaumonts are just like other people, Mama said, letting go of me and adding a bit more flour to my dough as she recited the words I'd heard so many times before. We get born, and sometimes later we die. And in between, we're happy and sad. We feel love, and we feel fear. We eat, and we sleep. And we hurt, like everyone else. I thought about Mama as I walked around the side of the church and up the rutted dirt road in a short way, listening with relief as the voices faded and an ensemble of crickets began warming up their evening act. Maybe I'd woken them up, I mused to myself, kicking at rocks. I crossed the road and headed toward an old, boarded-up and falling-down house that looked as though a truckload of white paint had dropped on it from top to bottom once upon a time ago. Fish had stayed on the bus with Samson. He was still stewing and grouchy, and was now almost as quiet and broody as our little brother. Bobby was outside the bus, chewing on a new length of bubble tape and cursing under her breath, so we all gave her plenty of space. I stepped up onto the porch swing of that old house cautiously, thinking that a porch swing would have made it a perfect place, once upon a time. Since we didn't have our own in Consacanabransas, Papa would take us to the world's largest porch swing in the park at Hebron. That swing could hold 15 people at one time. Papa would load the whole family into the station wagon and let Rocket Spark drive us up there on Saturday afternoons to sit all together on that long, crazy swing that had no porch attached. Just use your imagination, Mibs, Papa would say when I complained that a swing couldn't be a porch swing without a porch. Close your eyes and imagine what kind of a grand house might have a porch swing this size. I'd do as he said, but the only place I ever pictured was our own home. Every good country home needs a place to sit and think and watch the clouds roll by, Papa had said to me. Papa wanted to build us our very own swing. It was always near the top of his list of important things to do. I knew I had to get to Papa soon. I couldn't let anything happen to him, not with that list left unfinished. He wouldn't want to abandon our dreams. He'd want to build that swing so we could all sit there together. The porch creaked and groaned. I turned around to find Will Jr. standing on the porch behind me. He didn't come close, like he'd done before. Now he had his hands in his pockets and was looking at me as though he'd never seen a girl before. "What's going on, Mibbs?" "What do you mean?" I said, not looking at him straight on. "I mean, maybe you should start telling me what happened back there on the bus, with Fish and that storm of wind," Will Jr. said, still studying me. I ran my hand across the porch rail, absently brushing at the peeling paint that covered the old gray wood like lacy splinters. Still not able to stare Will Jr. in the eye. "I don't know what you want me to tell you," I said, feeling false and fickle, knowing exactly what he wanted to hear, and knowing that I could never tell him. When I braved a glance at his face, I could see that Will's eyes were bright and eager with curiosity, like a small child waiting for a parade to come around the corner. "I've always known there was something different about you, Miss Beaumont, and your brothers, too," Will Jr. said. I shrugged my shoulders, not agreeing, but not saying anything either. "Don't get me wrong, I like that about you," Will added awkwardly, stepping a bit closer. Surprised and embarrassed, I stood speechless on that porch until the silence grew itchy and uncomfortable. Searching desperately for some way to change the subject, I rounded fully on Will Jr. and demanded in a fluster, "So just why are you called Will Jr. anyway? I know your daddy's not Will Sr. His name's not even William, for heaven's sake." He smiled back at me with a devilish grin. "Maybe you're not the only one with a secret, Mibbs." I looked up and down at that boy, and for some reason I couldn't help but smile back at him, even if it did make my cheeks burn red. "I suppose I can live with that," I said finally. Like he and I had come to some kind of arrangement. Our secrets would stay secrets. Will Jr. pulled one hand out of his pocket. He was holding the wrapped-up Happy Birthday pen set. He'd retrieved it from the floor of the bus, and now he held it out to me. The bright wrapping was ripped on one side, and a bit worse for the wearer. "It's still your birthday, you know." I took the present from Will, and smiled even wider. He was right. It was still my birthday, and I hadn't yet opened a single present. I stuck one finger into the tear on the side, and ripped the paper away from a thin, hinged box. A gust of wind, I hoped, did not belong to Fish, swept the wrapping paper out of my hands and sent it up and across the road and away from us. Opening the box, I found 2 fine and fancy ballpoint pens with shiny silver finger grips and rounded caps. I set the box down on top of the porch rail and pulled out one of the pens. "I could have tried writing something if that paper hadn't blown away," I said. Will Jr. swept his arm out in front of him with a gallant gesture before kneeling down on the cracked and flaking boards at my feet like he was a grown-up man proposing. He held one hand out to me, palm up, offering it as a writing surface. Nervously, I took his hand in mine. The blue ink flowed out smooth and easy against Will Jr.'s skin. And in a moment, I'd drawn a smiling sun. The next moment, I jolted backward, tripping over a jutted porch plank and falling onto my tail end, as that smiling sun blinked its eyes and cleared its throat like it had just woken up. And now it had something to say.